We see these big headlines flash up all the time, right? But sometimes the real story, the deeper meaning, it kind of gets lost in the rush.
Yeah, absolutely. Things move so fast.
So today we want to cut through some of that noise. We're going to take a really close look at something called Operation Sindoor. You probably saw the name.
Definitely made waves.
Hmm.
This was early morning, May 7th, 2025. India carried out what they described as precision strikes.
Right. Hitting targets across the border in Pakistan, and Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Terrorist infrastructure, they called it.
hmm And the official statement from the Press Information Bureau, India's information wing, was quite pointed. They said, look, this isn't a declaration of war,
But
but it was absolutely a statement. A statement of resolve was the phrase they used.
And that name, Operation Sindoor,
Okay.
it's evocative, isn't it? Sindoor, that red powder, it's so symbolic in Indian culture.
It really is. Ties into commitment, protection. It's not just a random military code name. It feels deliberate, like it's meant to convey something deeper.
A sense of duty, maybe? A measured response?
Possibly. And you absolutely cannot disconnect it from what happened just days before. The horrific terror attack in Pahalgam.
26 civilians killed. That attack, it hangs heavy over this whole operation. It's the catalyst, really.
Without a doubt. The grief, the anger across India after Pahalgam was, well, it was palpable. You could feel it.
So the decision for Operation Sindoor, it wasn't just a knee-jerk reaction then.
No, the government sources stressed it was based on, and this is their term, irrefutable intelligence.
Okay, irrefutable intelligence.
Right.
What did that intel supposedly show?
It apparently drew a direct line from the terrorists who carried out the Pahalgam attack back to specific infrastructure, launch pads, camps across the line of control.
And sadly, the idea of groups using that region, Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, for training and launching attacks, that's not new, is it?
Not at all. It's been a persistent problem for decades. But what felt different here, perhaps, was the response.
How so?
Well, instead of focusing primarily on diplomatic pressure, which often happens, India opted for direct military action. Swiftly.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics then. What exactly were they trying to achieve with these strikes?
The main goal seems to have been neutralizing active terror camps. Camps they believe were not just involved in Pahalgam, but were actively planning more attacks inside India.
And they hit multiple locations.
9. 9 distinct sites were targeted.
9. That sounds very specific. How would they even pinpoint these places?
Well, the thinking is it was a combination of things. Human intelligence on the ground, agents,
Okay.
and also advanced surveillance. Drones, satellite imagery, that sort of tech.
And these weren't just random spots in the woods.
No, they were described as nerve centers. Key hubs for recruitment, training, indoctrinating fighters, storing weapons, and, crucially, acting as launch pads to send militants across the border.
Right. And the weapons used in the strikes, there was talk about what India might have deployed.
Yes. Some defense analysts speculated about long-range standoff weapons. The name that came up was the SLP missile.
SLP? What's that?
It's an air-launched cruise missile. Pretty sophisticated. Can be fired from aircraft like the Rafale jets India operates.
Meaning they could hit targets from a safer distance?
Exactly. Hit targets relatively deep inside, minimizing the risk to their own pilots and planes. The whole operation seemed designed around precision and avoiding civilian deaths.
That seems like a critical point. Avoid civilian casualties. And you mentioned they also steered clear of Pakistani military facilities.
Correct. Reports indicate Pakistani army posts or bases were deliberately not targeted.
That feels like a very clear signal being sent, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It communicates. This is about the terrorists using your soil, not about escalating a conflict with your military or your state. It's a way to try and contain the situation.
So we have the why Pahalgam, the what hitting those 9 terror hubs precisely. What about the how? The execution and the immediate fallout.
Well, the timing was classic special operations. Pre-dawn. Maximum surprise.
Catch them off guard.
Right. And then the public announcement didn't lag far behind. That allowed India to sort of control the initial narrative, frame it their way.
Get ahead of the story. Did we see any proof it worked?
Initial reports cited visual evidence, satellite pictures, maybe thermal imaging showing destruction at the target sites. Rubble, basically. And signs that activity had just stopped.
And anything else?
There were also reports, though obviously hard to verify independently, of intercepted communications, chatter among the terror groups.
What did that suggest?
Confusion, fear, talk of losses equipment, personnel. It suggested the strikes hit home, tactically speaking.
Now, who exactly were these groups? Did India name names? I recall they were a bit cautious initially.
They were. Officially, the Indian government statements didn't point fingers at specific organizations like Lashkar-e-Taiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed right away.
Everyone assumes it's them, right, given their history.
Pretty much. Most defense analysts familiar with the region operate on the assumption that these camps were linked to Lainti and Jem. Both have, a long and bloody history of attacks in India.
So the official language was very careful. Action against terrorism, not against Pakistan.
Exactly. Framing is key in these situations.
Yeah.
And this action, Operation Sindoor, it doesn't just come out of the blue strategically, does it? It seems to connect to a bigger policy idea.
You mean this doctrine of active deterrence?
Precisely. That idea really solidified, or at least became much more public, after the Pulwama attack in 2019 and the Balakot airstrikes that followed.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. Active deterrence. What does that actually involve? How does Operation Sindoor fit the mold?
Well, at its core, it's about shifting from just defending after an attack to proactively hitting back at the source of cross-border terror threats.
So don't just wait to be hit back at their bases.
Kind of. The idea is to deter future attacks by showing you're willing and able to strike their infrastructure. But crucially, these responses are meant to be limited.
Limited how?
Limited in scope, in duration. The goal isn't to start an all-out war, but to send a very strong signal. Inflict pain, degrade capability, but avoid a wider conflict. Sindoor looks like a textbook example of that thinking. A targeted response to a specific major provocation.
And how did this play out inside India, politically and with the public?
Domestically, there was widespread support, generally speaking. National security tends to unite people.
Even the opposition.
Broadly, yes. The opposition parties tended to back the government's right to act, though there were naturally some calls for more details for briefings to Parliament about the long-term plan.
In the public mood.
Overwhelmingly supportive. A lot of national pride, a sense that something decisive was finally done after the tragedy in Pahalgam. Patriotic fervor was quite high.
Okay, so support at home. What about the rest of the world? How did other countries react? Pakistan, obviously, but others too.
The international reaction was quite measured, actually. You had the U.S. urging restraint on both sides, but significantly, they also acknowledged India's right to self-defense. That's important language.
Acknowledging the justification, essentially.
Then you had countries like Russia and France, key partners for India who were reportedly briefed beforehand. They expressed understanding for India's position.
And China.
China did what China usually does in these situations. Called for dialogue, de-escalation, urged calm.
Standard response. And Pakistan.
Pakistan, predictably, condemned it strongly, called it a violation of sovereignty, aggression. But, and this is quite important, there wasn't an immediate large-scale military retaliation from their side.
Interesting. So it seems that careful messaging from India might have paid off internationally, that whole focused, measured, non-escalatory line.
It definitely seems like it helped shape the narrative. That language wasn't just for the domestic audience. It was aimed squarely at international capitals, too, trying to reassure everyone that this wasn't the start of something bigger. Managing perceptions is huge in these moments.
Absolutely. What about on the ground back in Jammu and Kashmir, especially near Pahalgam?
Well, security was definitely tightened across J&K. You'd expect that. More checkpoints, higher alert levels in sensitive areas.
Any major trouble?
No reports of major disturbances or widespread unrest emerged. And in Pahalgam itself, reports suggested a mood of quiet solidarity, almost a grim satisfaction, perhaps.
Closure is probably the wrong word after something so awful.
It is. Nothing brings people back. But maybe, just maybe, a sense that accountability in some form had been delivered, that the loss wasn't just ignored.
It does feel, looking at the whole picture, like this could be a marker, a shift in India's approach to counterterrorism, more assertive maybe.
A lot of defense watchers think so. It points towards a strategy that's less reactive, more willing to use military force proactively, based on intelligence and precision technology.
Less waiting, more doing.
Something like that. Some analysts believe these kinds of targeted strikes might become, well, not routine, but a more readily available option in India's security playbook, especially given how threats are changing.
You mean things like hybrid warfare, where it's not just armies facing armies anymore?
Exactly. You've got that messy mix of conventional tactics, cyber attacks, propaganda, disinformation, and these non-state actors, sometimes with state backing. It's complex.
So terrorist infrastructure isn't just tents in the woods anymore.
No, it's also their comms networks, their funding channels, their online recruitment efforts, and hybrid warfare is just that blurring of lines, making security much harder. Sindoor looks like one way of trying to respond decisively in that complex environment.
So zooming out, what are the big questions still left hanging after Operation Sindoor? What should we be thinking about moving forward?
Well, the biggest one is always deterrence, isn't it? Will this actually stop or significantly reduce future attacks? That's the hope, but it's hard to know.
The $64,000 question.
Right. And then there's the regional impact. How does this shift the power balance, the relationship between India and Pakistan long term? And of course, how does it play into India's own politics down the road? Lots of unknowns still.
So it's definitely more than just a single military event. It signals a potential new chapter, maybe? India actively going after what it sees as the sources of terror, delivering its own form of justice.
I think that's a fair way to put it. And while we talk strategy and geopolitics, it's vital we don't forget the human cost that started it all.
The families in Pahalgam.
Exactly. For them, this action, whatever its larger implications, might offer, well, perhaps some small measure of solace, a sense that their immense loss wasn't unanswered.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about how countries try to protect themselves now, how they balance that need for security, for justice, with the risk of conflict, especially in such a volatile part of the world. It's a tough line to walk, definitely something to mull over beyond the headlines.